Oh, okay.
Hello, everybody. These two people that are real movie moguls have asked me to do a movie about something about my life, I guess. And it's been a long one because in a week I'll be 95 years old. And they're having a big birthday party for me. So I'm trying to stay here for another week so I can attend my birthday party. But anyway, starting with they want me to give you a little slight review and answer some questions from my children, and of which there were 6. And it's going to be a very tedious job, and I'm not quite sure what they're going to gain by doing this, but we'll give it a try anyway, just for the fun of it. Okay.
Okay, Mom, this is Carrie speaking to you. And the first question we're going to look at was from Phil. And Phil says, other than having Phil, were there any other great moments in your life? So he has set the tone.
I'm sorry, but there wasn't ever any other event in my life that equaled that, so we'll have to let it go at that. Okay?
Okay, now Paige, Phil's granddaughter, is and so therefore your great-granddaughter Paige is asking, where were you born and raised? Where did you grow up? Tell us
I
a
was
little.
born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I lived there for 16 years. And it was a country that I was really very happy to leave because they get real cold weather. They get bad storms and they get really hot all summer. So I came out here when I was 16 years old. My whole family moved out and we went to stay with my Aunt May and her family out in North Seattle when we got here.
Okay, good.
Okay, all right. And now Kaylin was interested in your schools. What schools did you attend and what degrees or certificates do you have?
That's a good question because I really don't have any degrees or certificates. I went to a grade school in Minneapolis and well, I'll leave that till I hear from Carrie about what she wants to know. Because I was going to tell you about the time that she got slapped by her teacher.
Oh, but not Carrie, it was Ruthie.
It was, I'm sorry, I better start over. I'm already in trouble.
So you went how far in Minnesota?
I went to the high school until I had about 2 years to go in my high school when I came out here. And instead of going right away, we were there kind of at a midterm. So we missed a half a term there. But anyway, when they sent my records out, they found that I had been given credit for having taken care of some little black children. Every day after school, I went down into Minneapolis from my high school, and I played with these little 4, 5, 6-year-old black children, and there were about 20 of them there that they were caring for, and I got to help care for them. And they gave me a whole half a year's credit on my schooling for having done that, which I thought was awful nice of them, but I didn't know about it at the time. Okay.
All right, and now we want to get to your real character. We want to hear about when you were going to the movies as a young person. Was that in Minnesota or was that in Seattle?
What do you mean, when we were sneaking in the movie?
Yes, something like that. Can you tell us that story a little bit for posterity?
I suppose.
Was that Minnesota?
Is that on?
Yeah.
It is on while you're doing this, I see. Okay, well, yeah, we lived about 5 blocks from the movie theater. And every Saturday, all of us kids would go down to the back door of the movie, and one of us would pay to get in, and then they'd go down and open the back door one at a time, and we'd sneak in and crawl under the benches or seats. You know how those seats are in the movie theater. We'd crawl under them till we got up somewhere where we thought we were safe to pop up, and we'd show ourselves. And there were 5 or 6 of us that were in the group that did this, and we had a great time. Our parents, I don't recall that our parents ever said anything about it or if they even knew we were doing it. But we were together somewhere, so they knew we were all right. But it was really funny because they usually had a pretty good kids movie there on Saturday.
Now, how old were you? Probably about 10?
I was probably 11, 10, somewhere in there when we were doing that.
Okay.
And it was the highlight of the week. You know?
I think we could probably assume there was a very kind movie manager there. He probably saw those 6 heads every
Very
Saturday
likely.
and kindly
Very likely.
let them stay. What do you remember how much it would have cost to pay to go in?
Probably a dime.
Yeah,
We didn't have a dime. A
yeah.
dime was a lot of money in those days.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
it was probably about what $1 is today. That much has changed in money value. So that was a lot of money for us to have to come up with. And of course, I had 2 brothers that probably were in the group too, so that would have amounted to a lot of money for my family.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. What were your brothers' names? How big was your family?
My family consisted of 3 boys and me. The older boy was Richard, and he went in the service and was killed in the war over in England. He was flying a fighter plane when it got shot down.
Only Mom, that was Doug, right? That was Doug.
Oh,
that was.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was Doug that did that. Richard was in the service, and when they opened those gates and let the prisoners, our people, out of the jails that the Germans had them all stored in, that what's the name of them?
Auschwitz, was it?
Auschwitz was the name of the containment for the prisoners, and my brother got to open the gate, one of the gates of these buildings that had all our people stored like animals in them. And they were all very, very grateful and remembered him. And my next brother was Doug. Doug was 5 years younger than me. And so when we moved out there, I was 16 and he was 5 years younger. But when he got out in the Seattle area, he got in a bicycle accident and really injured his leg. And when he went to the officers that would let him go into the Air Force, which is where he desperately wanted to go, this was during the war, at probably about 1943, somewhere in there, anyway. And they wouldn't take him because of his leg, and he went back and went back and went back and begged them to take him, that he really wanted to be in the service. Finally, they let him in, and 4 months later, he was the one that was shot down over the English Channel there. He was flying a bomber plane by then. In just that short time, they trained him to fly a plane that would drop bombs or would do the job of whatever they were doing in the war. So that was the last we know of Doug. And my younger brother was 6 months old when I carried him out of the house and put him in the car when we moved out to Seattle. And he's been living out here, but he did die about so many years
4
ago,
years
like
ago.
maybe 2, 3, something like that. He's not been gone very long.
And Richard, what was the story of Richard and Moy, Dick and Moy?
Digging, well, then Richard, my oldest brother, married Moy, and they lived out in North Seattle. And he had learned, when he was in the service, he had learned how to fly a plane. And he took a plane with his wife and his 2 children up to Vancouver in Alaska. It's not in Alaska, it's in Canada. To Vancouver anyway, and they were having dinner with some friends. And after dinner, they flew back, and it got dark sooner than they expected, is what they suspect happened. Anyway, his plane crashed in Fort, where do I go every Friday to see Emily? Name it.
Port Townsend.
Port Townsend. It crashed in Port Townsend, and it took about 24 hours for them to find the plane. In the meantime, he died, his son died, and his daughter had had her hair sitting in gasoline for enough hours that she lost all the hair on the back of her head. But she always managed to cover it. And was that all the plane crash? I think that
And
was,
Moy.
I named everybody in it. And anyway,
And Kathy comes to the picnic.
Kathy was his daughter, and Kathy still comes to our picnics, and we're glad to see her.
Mhm.
And she's your cousin.
Should I turn this on?
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Okay.
Are you on?
Yeah.
All right. Mom, now Brian Ford wants to know about the make and model of your first car.
Okay, my brother took me to teach me how to drive. This wasn't my first car, but it was his first car. And so my brother Richard took me out, and while I was still in Minneapolis, and he set me in this car, and it was a Model T Ford truck, pickup truck. And he had me drive that. He told me what to do. And in a Model T, it's quite different. You have 3 pedals down there where your left foot goes instead of 2. And you have to know what each pedal will do when you're driving and what to push. And then the brake was kind of odd too. When you used the brake, you didn't know if it was going to work or not. But anyway, he had me go around the block, just go around the block and learn how to drive the car. So we start out, and I ask him, hey, wait, what do I I don't know what to do. And he put the newspaper up in front of his face like this, and he said, just drive it. And I said, look, I don't know how to drive it. And he kept saying, well, hold that newspaper. He'd hold the newspaper up like this and read the newspaper, and he would ignore me totally. And I'm trying to learn how to drive the car without any instruction. And I just kind of curved around a little and jerked it and got it moving. And we went around the block, and I somehow figured out something that made it work. And that was about the best I could do for my first car I drove. But anyway, I got it back to where we started, which was an alley and back. We all had alleys in those days. They made 2 houses on opposite sides on different streets, but they had an alley between them always. and we were parked in the alley when I was asked to drive that car. That's how I learned how anyway.
Oh my goodness. And that was a shift, of course. Today it's so much easier
Oh,
with
yeah,
an
yeah.
automatic
Right,
transmission.
I forgot about that. That was what you had to do or something.
Okay, now we're going to switch gears, so to speak, and we're going to discuss where did you meet Grandpa? Shalon wants to know, and Joe, your daughter, wants to say, yeah, the same question. Where did you first meet Morris James Hunter, and what attracted you to him?
Well, first met him in church. He was a deacon in the Presbyterian church in North Seattle. And the family that we were living with in their garage, which we lived for about 6 months, and their garage was set up to sort of handle people, but anyway, that's where we lived. And I walked it was about 7 blocks to the church where I met Morris Hunter, and we just went out to different things. But the first thing that I went to with him was he invited me to go to, I don't know if it's the first thing or not, but anyway, I barely met him. He wanted to take me to a movie, and that was a real thrill to get to go to a movie. That was about 1938, 39, somewhere in there. And he said he wanted to take me to the movie, and I was so thrilled I didn't even ask him what it was. So we went there and paid our fee and went in, and it was, and the movie was with Clark Gable in, what I said it a while ago. I told you what it was. It Happened One Night was the name of the movie. And if you ever get a chance to pick that up and show it in your video cameras, I know it's out there, but It Happened One Night with Clark Gable, one of the finest actors that we ever saw in movies. And we just had a nice evening watching the movie.
And as I recall, you're telling the story further about Morris. He was kind of like, what attracted you to him?
Oh, he was very handsome and big and tall. He was over 6 feet. And he was just a very nice person. You know what you mean when you meet a nice person. They're kind and generous, and they're just different than some people.
And what color was his hair?
His hair was really kind of a deep red color, beautiful hair, and curly, real wavy. He had a beautiful crop of hair, and I should have a picture of him, but I don't happen to have one in my hand at the moment.
So Shalon can know she comes by her curly hair honestly, because there it was.
There's curly hair, yeah.
And do you have a story about what you wrote on the blackboard about him? Do you remember that?
Do I? No, I don't.
Okay, we're good.
At the
Okay,
moment.
all right, okay. Let's go on to then Jacob wanted to know, this is switching gears completely, about the dogs you've had in your life and their names, if you can
Oh,
remember
Jacob,
them.
you're asking me to remember much more than my memory could contain, but I can tell you about the first dog I had, and this was in Minneapolis, and he lived almost as long as I lived in Minneapolis. And he was a brown medium-sized dog, a real pet, and we had him for 14 years, and his name was Jack. And I always wanted to get a dog that would be my last dog, named Jack. And he was just a real neat dog. Sometimes you get a dog that's kind of special, and he was. But he was our only dog in Minneapolis. And then when I moved out here, when we got married, we had 2 border collies, and we had them in a fenced yard out in North Seattle. One was Molly, and one was Peggy. They were both female dogs, and they were wonderful, beautiful dogs. We had people come from, not distances, but around the neighborhood, but come to see and talk to our dogs because everybody loved our collies. And those were the dogs that we had when we were first married. And since then, I don't know that I could remember very many special dogs, but we did have a special Rottweiler that was a winner at all the shows. And he was a big dog. He was grown when we got him, and he was trained. And he was a wonderful dog. But shortly after he showed us that he could win all the shows, we had to put him in a hospital out in North Seattle, and they called because he was having some troubles. And the hospital called to tell us that he had died, or that they were having to put him to sleep because of some really serious problem that he had. But we had him for about 2 years, and that was all the time that we had him. And he was in the shows. We put him in all the shows this was for obedience and all, and not obedience, but confirmation shows that he was in at that time. But it was really a joy to take him to a show because we almost knew that he'd win the top prize. So he was our top show dog. But we had a lot of other dogs along the way, but I could probably never remember what they were or their names. They came and they stayed with us for a few years and they were gone. But we enjoyed all our dogs. They were all our pets.
Mm-hmm. Toby was the Doberman.
Toby was a Doberman. Right.
And was that the dog you cured of distemper or some terrible disease? Remember that? And you nursed him back to health.
Oh, well.
And then that dog was so devoted to you. But
I think that was Toby. Yeah.
Seemed to me like it was.
He was a really great Doberman. We had several Dobermans too, though.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one that was very protective too of anybody in the family. And one day, my 2 sons was my 2 sons, wasn't it? Jim and
Phil.
Who was?
Jim and Phil, is that?
And was it Phil? Yeah, yeah, it was Phil. Phil, they were wrestling out in the backyard, and Toby hadn't seen him before, and he went and got a hold of his shirt, and he jumped on top of him because they were wrestling, and Phil was on top, and Toby was gonna rescue Jim. So he did it by going and piling on. He was really going to bite him, I think, if he hadn't thrown him off quick. But he got off he said, if that dog ever does that to me again, I'm going to get rid of him. But he was just one of our dog experiences, of which we had many. I could go on all night. But
And Eva, Jacob's sister, is curious about cats. Do you remember any of the cats particularly, or?
No, I really don't. Cats. I've had a lot of cats over the years, but they're hard to remember. The only one that I have at the moment that's been here since 2002. I got this at a rental that we sold, and the lady left the cat to just wander for herself outside. She had 7 cats, and she took 4 with her and left 3 to wander through the neighborhood like people do. And other people leave cats like that too. And this cat was finally captured by one of the other tenants there because I asked them to. And I brought her home, and I've had her ever since then. And I named her after the lady who deserted her, which was Cricket. And I still have Cricket.
All right, and then Dwight, your loving son-in-law, is curious to know about department stores. When you were young, we all think Walmart existed forever, but where did you buy your clothes and
Well,
stuff
there
when you
were
were young?
some pretty, there were pretty good sized department stores, even back in Minneapolis. I remember Dayton and Donaldson were 2 big department stores in Minneapolis, and we shopped there. We were really shopping for anything, important or we didn't think we could find. And today, the gal Diana that I live with would rather go to the Goodwill and do the shopping. She thinks that's a lot more fun. We sure save a lot of money, and she's brought home some beautiful things by doing it.
Did you sew a lot though as a kid? Did you make your own clothes, or was that not
I
something you did?
I didn't. No.
Okay.
My mother really didn't either.
Okay. Yeah.
We had sewing stuff, but we didn't do much sewing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Stop.
All right. Now we're going to when you and Dad moved to Port Orchard. When was that? Before you got married, or after? I guess after you got married, probably.
Yeah, we were
right?
married when we moved to Port Orchard. In fact, it was 41 that the bridge went down, and we had been over here and bought our property ahead of that. So we were coming over and just visiting it at that time. But we were living in the little cabin over at Grandma's when we first moved over here. We moved to the little cabin, and then they were giving out numbers for you to go to the war, and Dad got a number that he would be drafted to go into the army. And in the meantime, he was working in the Navy Yard, and he had been hurt in the Navy Yard. He had a guy dump a bucket of hot tar on his hands, and he came home that night with his hands. He was riding a Navy Yard bus that brought him home right to Grandma's door over there. That's where we were living. And he walked in with his hands, both his hands looked like footballs. They were wrapped in so much bandaging from the burns at the hospital he'd been at all day. And the burns lasted until actually the war was over. And or at least he never got called in the draft after he got to where he could have gone, which I don't know, it might have been 2 years before he was totally healed, so they would take him.
I see. Yeah. And then, were you developing this land at that time then?
We were working on this, we were building our house. We started, we were clearing the land, trying to get electricity in. This whole area between here and the road was solid trees, and we had to get out, and of course we didn't have the equipment we have today. We could probably do it in an afternoon today, but we had to get out there with our shovels and pickaxes and what have you to get it really cleared so that they could make a road out of it and we could come in that way. And we had, it was all hand work though, because we had no equipment at all. We were lucky to have a shovel or something that we could move the dirt with. But all those trees had to be taken out and burned and discarded one way or another so we could get our electricity.
I had another question about that, but it fell out of my head. You might mention, because the kids don't realize that this driveway was not always the entrance into the place.
Yeah, that was not an entrance into the place until probably, well up in the 40s, before we got the electricity, of course, but we had several years when this was not a way in. You had to go up to the other entrance where that apple tree is and come in through the valley and up the hill. And the only robbery we ever had here, aside from one that happened many years later when we had a house there, but that somebody drove in here one night and we had a Model T truck at that time. Maybe it was a Model A, but anyway, it was one of those old trucks. Somebody came up and stole a tire off it. And that's really the only real robbery we had. But that was pretty upsetting in those days to lose a tire, even at that. But
Okay, and so then, so you had some of the kids were born while you were living over at Grandma's, or?
yeah, I think so. And some of them. Because I know I had two little ones in the house the day the airplane went over that crashed. It was an Army plane, and I was out toward the front of the property at the time, and I looked back over the house and there was an airplane. It looked like it was flying awful low, and the people that were in the airplane were jumping out of it, and they were parachuting out of it, and I was afraid it was going to hit the house. I just about collapsed over fear that plane was going to hit us, because it looked like it could. And they kept jumping. There were 3 or 4 guys in it that jumped out and saved their lives, and the plane kept on coming, and it went right over our house, and it went over just past the other highway, the other road, main road, and crashed over there somewhere. And because it was an Army plane, nobody ever heard about it outside of those of us that saw it. And there was nothing posted about it or nothing in the paper about it. We never knew what happened or if there were more people on it or anything. It was a total mystery from then on.
Wow. And it did not actually hit any structure then, apparently.
No, it didn't. It didn't hit any structure. It was all woods over there where it landed. And the other highway being the Glenwood Road. This is the Glenwood Road. That would be
Sydney?
Sydney. It went just past Sydney. There were a few people also that saw it and remarked on it. And we talked about it for years, but most people didn't even see it. Of course, they didn't happen to be out. That's the only plane crash I ever saw in my lifetime.
Yeah. Wow.
I didn't really see it, but I saw the guys parachute out of it, way off back.
How weird to not hear a comment about
no
it.
comments about
But
it
it was wartime.
at all.
Probably. Huh?
It was wartime.
You don't admit to
But
any
that could
weakness.
so easily have taken out our house,
Yeah,
my 2 kids and me, even if it had crashed right there.
right.
And I was just scared stiff. I was too scared to move. And I was standing out in the yard when I saw it.
That has to be a sight
But
to see.
you talked about the young kids, having young kids. I had Judy and Joe, and I can remember that they were about 2 and 3, something like that at the time. And they were in the house sleeping when this happened.
Wow.
There was nothing, I didn't have time to do anything.
Wow.
Except stand
Oh.
hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
It just seemed like it went right over my head.
I don't remember ever hearing that story. That's interesting.
I can still see that plane.
Yeah.
Anytime I want to imagine.
That's mighty low when a plane's ready to crash that close. Okay, Lori Liebeck, friend's daughter, and your granddaughter-in-law, says, in the midst of raising children, being a wife, and working a farm, what kind of things did you do for yourself to rejuvenate your mind, body, and spirit? Where did you find space?
Well, I always loved to read. I read books, but also I was in sales work my whole married life practically, and I was always selling something, so I was busy at that too. And I don't know just what years I did what, but if I go back over what all I was selling, it would amount to quite a bit. I started out in vacuum cleaners, and I learned how to sell a vacuum cleaner, but you had to go knock on a door to find somebody that let you in order to even show a vacuum cleaner. So I started out with that. But over the years, I don't know if I can even name all the things I sold. I went into cameras. At one time I was selling a camera called the Photron, and I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I found out eventually that there was something that you couldn't do with that Photron that you could with another camera. Somehow I was disappointed in it and I quit selling it. I sold Encyclopedia Britannica for a while. And I drove all the way to Nia Bay. If you know where Nia Bay is, it's quite a ways from my house. I drove all the way up there one day, and these people were just delighted with. I had appointments to go show it from the office that I was selling out of. And I got all the way up to Nia Bay and showed this whole family this set of encyclopedia, and they wanted it. All excited about it, and they paid me the $10 down they had to pay, and I don't remember how much it cost them or anything or what I made on it, but anyway, I drove all the way back down home alone. It took me all night practically to do that one sale, and I got home and I had a phone call from them that they canceled the order.
That sales work for you.
One of the few cancellations I ever had in my life. It's one that I remembered though.
Matthew, your grandson, our son, is curious about what it was like after living through the Great Depression. I don't know how much you remember of it and its effects. And if you were to go back and live through it all over again, and to do so with $10 million sitting in cash, where would you focus your investments? And knowing what you know now.
10 million.
That's kind of a complex
Well,
question.
I'd probably go in the market with it in some safe place. Because what would I need? I couldn't possibly need that much money or spend it or use it. But if I were to try to save it and just put it away and it'd always be there, I'd probably put it in the market where we were getting dividends. And you always get the dividends. It doesn't matter if the market goes up or down, you get the dividends. And it may not amount to much, but some of them are pretty good if you really look for dividends that are up around 6%. Why, it can, a lot of them are just give maybe 2 or 3%. But if you look for good dividends and put all that money in there, it would multiply it in time by quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably what I'd do.
Be safe from the ups and downs of the market.
Yeah.
Mark was curious, Mark, your grandson, Ruth's son, was curious about, with all the hard and sad things that have happened in life, how do you keep your attitude so positive?
keep busy, just keep busy is all I know. Keep yourself cheerful by enjoying life. And you don't have to go down just because there's a real sadness in your life. You don't have to, like losing Ruthie was the saddest thing that happened in our lifetime. And we were very, very unhappy over it, but on the other hand, we had a life to live, and we just kept on living it and being cheerful.
Accentuate the
Okay.
positive, huh?
Yeah.
That's our last question.
Yes, go.
Stephanie, your granddaughter-in-law, Mark's wife, wants to know what advice do you have for great-grandkids as they grow up in today's world?
Well, I could give tons of advice, but I'm not sure any of them would pay too much attention to me because I'm an old person that doesn't know anything. But there are some things that a youngster can do to make their life better. And always pay attention to what your parents tell you because they're smart, wise parents, and they will give you good advice. And if they tell you you shouldn't do something and you wanted to do it, well then you shouldn't do it if they said so, because they have their reasons. And I just think being a good kid and staying out of the drug traffic and that sort of thing, and the booze, don't get into drinking. We have never had very much drinking problem with our family. And we have huge picnics and nobody brings kegs of beer and that sort of thing like they do at a lot of family picnics. And usually our picnics are just fun and good food and this sort of thing. So when you go to a family picnic, keep it that way. Don't bring things that shouldn't be there. I'm sure you wouldn't get into this sort of thing. But there's so much temptation today to get into dumb drugs. Some they're just putting on the market now even, which are foolish, and I don't understand why. But you stay away from it all. Stay away from it all. If anybody offers you to try something, don't try it. Don't. Stay away from it. And I can't think of any better advice for you youngsters than to just be good people. Be good people like your parents have been.
That's good advice. And then Joshua, your grandson, Joshua Hunter, had the question, in your experience, what are the top 5 greatest innovations that have happened in your lifetime?
Oh dear, things have really changed. And just think to begin with that car I told you about, and then come and look at Phil's new Mercedes-Benz, a beautiful, beautiful red car. How cars have changed is incredible, and they are much easier to learn how to drive and much better things. But one thing would be that handheld telephone and all the new innovations of it, which there are many, and getting into technology. If you want me to answer in that way, there was none of the technology that you're getting into and that you know and understand, and they have got into. Things like your computer, for instance, you probably use it every day for all sorts of things, and it's just a wonderful tool to improve our lives. And if you want to actually talking airplanes even, because when I was a youngster, uh, Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic Ocean, the first plane to ever fly across the Atlantic Ocean. And I lived in Minneapolis. This was a really big event when this happened. Everybody in the world was looking at that airplane that Lindbergh flew because it had never been done before. And he had a successful trip about the ocean. And unfortunately, just after that, someone climbed up to a second-story window and stole his baby. They never saw it again. And it was the tragedy of the day. And I don't recall exactly what year it was, but it was a terrible happening. And may that never happen again. Other innovations, gee, there have been a lot of them. Even my shoes are greatly improved from what they were. I've got a new pair of, I don't know what the name of them is, but gee, they fit so good, and they're so good to walk in. And in building materials, new stuff has come into the homes that I couldn't even begin to name, that are things we didn't have when we were kids. In fact, I lived in a house for about 6 years with 4 new babies and no bathroom, no water, no electricity, nothing. It was during the war. And it didn't happen so that we could change until about 1946, the war ended. And at that time, the electricity company released the use of copper so that they could run the electric line into our house. In the meantime, they had $500 we gave them to put it in back in 1941. And that was the year the war started, was 1941. That's when things started to fall apart. But anyway, we couldn't hardly do anything after that in the way of innovation and new stuff all those years until about 47 when things started being released after the war again. So I don't know, I suppose there were a lot of them that I don't think of, but...
Well, I remember how you always wanted to have, once you got electricity, you wanted to have the latest appliances. So I remember how excited you were to get like a washing machine.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember the television being rolled in.
Even the dishwasher.
Dishwasher, and how that kind of stopped all the family colds we'd all share. And it was a portable one too, wasn't
Right.
it? And roll it to the sink.
There were many things that we didn't have when we were first married, the first few years of our marriage until the all the new technology entered, and they were able to make things that we never had before.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
Tell the kids one thing about how telephones functioned when we were kids. When
How
we
what?
had the telephone.
Oh, yeah, the telephone. Well, when I was a kid, you had to wind a crank, and you had all the neighbors had the same, were on the same line. There were usually, most people didn't have very many neighbors, but they were on that line, and everybody could listen to whatever was said on that line, and every household could pick it up if the phone rang, because it rang in everybody's house. And then they could pick it up and listen to the conversation. They could even enter into the conversation if they wanted to. And it made it kind of interesting, though. And if you were on the phone, and by the time you got done talking to whoever called you, you didn't know who it was that called you, because you talked to so many other people. And then people liked to do that. It was accepted because the reason why it was accepted was because you may have been calling in an emergency. You may have needed help. Maybe your baby was sick, or maybe you had a fight, or anything could have been as why they all answered the phone. because they could talk to you and help if there was any help needed. But probably wasn't, in fact, very likely it was not just a talk fest like they are today. You're texting and this sort of thing. There was nothing like that. And no one had time to just go hang on that phone and just gab. So nobody did. They just had these serious conversations. If someone called, they may have called to ask if you were okay today, if you'd been sick or something. But not much more than that would be called about it, unless they really did need help. But that was the point of the phone, was so that you did have help if you needed it. You did have neighbors that could come and give you a hand if your barn was on fire or something. Or if your cow got loose and you needed help bringing in the fence and you couldn't get them there. Or something like that. Anyway, there were few needs for a phone, but not many.
Says Tom.
Alright. Okay, all right, so now to go on with some of our thinking about this place, can you tell us a little bit about some of the adventures you had in developing water systems, but also the chickens, the whole chicken caper? Tell us some of
10
that.
years we were in chicken business and raised the chickens and sold them alive to someone that picked up 900 every week. We bought 900 babies every week from one guy and sold 900 big chickens ready for market every week also. And we were in that for 10 years raising chickens. And in the course of doing that, one year, Dad took his gun up because we were having trouble with a bear that was showing up in the field. And he went up there and he actually shot that bear because he would have broken our cages. We had cages that ran out there about 100 feet. And anyway, we bought this place back years and years ago, back in about 1936 or 7, somewhere in there anyway. I don't know the exact year. And slowly developed it over the years, but we had a lot of experiences that were kind of strange. Like one was we had a square construction that went over a well that we dug down close to our house and to get our water out of. And they had a platform about 8 feet down in the well, and it was a real sturdy platform made with 2x4s on edge so that it was strong. And one night, during the night, we had a neighbor's horse fell in the well. We had a platform over the top of it too, and he had to step up even. It's hard to imagine a horse stepping up like that, but he did. He stepped up and managed to fall upside down on its back in the well. And we had to have 2 tow truck cars, rigs, trucks, regular car tow trucks come out. Each took an end of him. They tied up the ends and lifted him up out of the well. And he got up and he started to get up and he wasn't good enough. He wasn't well enough to get up on his feet. And the horse died eventually from that event. But we had another well story where we had to drill a well then because our well there, we could hardly go on using it after the horse had been, he wasn't really in the water, but he was on top of it. We'd given up, and I think we were drilling a well at that time. But anyway, we had some big round concrete tubes that we were putting on to make a well. We were digging a hole, and as we dug it, these round things they were 36 inches across, and we'd set one of them here, and then go down in the hole and dig out enough dirt for it to sift. They were real heavy, and it would work its way down. Well, it got down about so far and it stopped. We couldn't make it move any farther. And Phil, my oldest son, went down in the well, just with not much to hang on to get there. But when he got down in the well, he was going to try to make it shift so that this one would go down in place. But when he got there, somehow he got his hand caught under it. It shifted and went down while he was standing there, and his hand was stuck. And we called for emergency people to help him get his hand out of there. But before they got here, they had dropped by rope. They had dropped down a lever, one of those metal lever type things, and he had put it in under beside his hand and managed to do that all with one arm. And he lifted the brick enough that he pulled his hand out, and he didn't come to any lifetime harm from that, but it was quite an exciting event. There was also a write-up in the paper about it, which we no doubt still have here somewhere. But anyway, we started this place way back years ago and built this little cabin that we lived in. We didn't have any water, power, or toilet facilities or anything. You wouldn't think you could live that way, but you can if you have to. And when we moved on here into the cabin, we couldn't get electricity because of the war. And they wouldn't let any private person use copper wire to put in an electrical system. So, but it cost us $500 which was a lot of money in those days, to get the wire brought in. And then we had to wait for about 5 years for them to do it because of the war. And then they wouldn't allow any to private use. But anyway, that was quite an experience living here with no bathroom, no water, I shouldn't say no water, because we then were getting water out of the well that the horse fell in. And we had a pump on it, a pump that you had to go down and hand pump the water out and carry it by the bucket up to your house. It was the only way you could have any water here, unless you wanted to walk a quarter of a mile and get some out of the creek. Why, there was a nice creek that went by the 20 acres we owned, but it was too far to walk to that. But anyway, we had quite a time getting started here and furnishing a house enough to raise. We had 3 children that were very small in here for quite a while. And we had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and in a couple of years another baby. And we were kind of occupied a lot trying to keep up to it all.
And of course, disposable diapers perhaps did not exist yet.
And disposable diapers were not heard of in those days. There were a lot of things that were not heard of that we had to handle, put up with, use. There was such a thing known as washing out your diapers. And that's what we had to do. We had to bring a tub of water up, or bring up buckets of water in a tub and wash the diapers by hand in this tub of water, and get them rinsed in another tub so they'd be clean, and then hang them up on a line to dry. And when they were dried, then of course we would probably not want to do more than a dozen or so at a time, but we had a lot of babies that went through a lot of diapers in those years. And we learned that you could do that if you had to. You can do anything if you have to, you know. You can make up all sorts of ways of doing things. Are you wanting me to be quieter or what?
No.
No. Anyway, it was quite an adventure here to have 3 children, babies really, little ones, and none of those facilities that you're so used to today that you just take them all for granted. But you're very fortunate to have it all.
Yeah.
Oh, and you probably had charge cards so you could run to the store and buy things?
Nobody heard of a charge card in our day. You went to your bank and got money if you needed it, and or else you cashed a check. We did have checks, and we could cash a check. And the bank that we were banking at disappeared somewhere over the years. But we now go to the Columbia Bank. I don't know if there's much of interest there.
Yeah.
But anyway, as the years went by, we got into the chicken business, and that kept us busy for 10 years. As the kids were old enough then to help a little, the 3 oldest ones were. And the fourth one wasn't quite, that was our Ruthie. And of course, Ruthie was one of the favorite little ones ever in the family. She was a very, very dear little girl, very sweet and very pretty. And Ruthie, of course, died when she was, how old was she? Was it 40?
44.
44. When she died when she was 44, and she had had Richard and Mark for her family. After she died, we had them in the family still, of course. And they're very, very nice children. And they grew up to be very, very nice people, which I hope all of you will. And you keep your principles and work hard. I think hard work is the secret to a good life, always. If you work hard, you always can do what you want to because you have whatever you need to do it with. And that's what it takes. And it's only perseverance and hard work that will produce all these things for you. So if you're just good kids, work hard. I call it keep your nose to the grindstone, while you can have a very good life because you'll earn it, you'll deserve it, and you won't take government checks. You won't have to live off the government. The government is not there to provide you a life. It's there to protect you as a citizen, protect you from anything happening to you from the outside. But otherwise, you should be on your own. You should be earning your own way. You should always be able to take care of yourself, your family, and have a good life by doing that.
Good.
Do you think that Ruthie's accordion playing helped her develop
Oh, I'm sure
diligence?
it did. Ruthie was an accordion player who was very, very good. She came in second on the state contest. They had one young man got ahead of her on it, but she did a beautiful job of playing the accordion. And she would take her accordion, and Phil would take his guitar, and they would go to nursing homes and to places where people were corralled that needed some entertainment because they didn't have any. And they would play the accordion and the guitar and make beautiful music for them. And I wish I had some recordings of what they did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't happen to have any. But they just were a wonderful pair to go out and do that service for the community. That's another thing. You serve your community. You do things for the community. You contribute to the community. You help the community. You do all the things that make it a good community, and everybody does well. Am I getting to the end of anything? I hope you kids are enjoying seeing, you youngsters are enjoying seeing your old great-grandmother, who's almost 95, telling you these things about what happened to the
Do the
family
next one.
when they were young people. These people that are your background, your your, what do I call it, your ancestors, I guess. You people all I have a chance to have a good life because of where we happened to be when we grew up. And believe me, a lot of it has happened to be because right at this time in our life, we've got millions of children coming in from outside our country even, without citizenship or the right to citizenship or knowing if they would ever get citizenship. And we've got an influx of children that nobody can believe are really coming into our country. And they're carrying them by the busload and just dumping them in different states. We already have a couple busloads that were dumped down at Fort Lewis here in Washington. And it's really a lot for us to have to take care of them. But it's because their parents weren't in such a fortunate place as we are and as you are to raise your children and make them be good citizens and be helpful. And I hope these children that come into our country can be helped and saved and preserved in some way, but they're talking about having to send them back because they don't have the citizenship here. And you should be a citizen to live in this country. So I don't know much more to say about that.
Okay.
Okay, well, Peter, our son, your grandson, wants to know what you consider the most valuable thing you have done in this life.
Boy, that's a poser. I don't know if I can think of anything I ever did that was terribly valuable in this life. Perhaps having somehow raised a real healthy, decent bunch of kids that have done well in their lives. My family consisting of Philip and Jim, my two oldest boys. Philip married to Fran, a wonderful girl, and they have a good life. And Jim being married to Diana, he was also a psychiatrist type and works hard. And they're both wonderful women that were added to our family. And we also have, the next one would be Judy. Judy was our oldest daughter, and she married a young man named Ken Austin, and they've had a really good life together. They live very close to where we did all their life, most of their married life, and they've just been wonderful people. And then Joanne was the next girl, and she also married a good man who teaches at the school. Even long after he retired, he goes back and helps at the school. And they have had a wonderful life and also live just a few miles from where we live here on our farm. And we call it a farm, but we don't farm any animals. I gotta tell you about the animals, but wait until I tell you also about the rest of the family. That was my 4 girls. I haven't named my 4 girls yet. I named my 2 boys and my two girls, did I? Judy being my oldest and Joanne next. And then Carrie was my next youngster, and she married a really neat guy named
With a Y.
I'm running out of mental capacity. And what's your name?
Dwighty.
Dwighty. His name is Dwight, and I always called him Dwighty. He didn't think that was quite right, but anyway, I got away with it. So Carrie and Dwight were my youngest of the 4 girls. it together. And the next were my two boys that I already mentioned, Jim and Phil, and their wives. Jim's Diana and Phil, Fran. So that was my whole family. And in the meantime, of course, we lost Ruthie. And it was a devastating, terrible thing to happen to our family. We had a very hard time getting over that. But we managed, and their children, Richard and Mark, are wonderful citizens and are doing really well also in raising a family. They each have 2 children. And the babies are wonderful children. They're up into the 5, 6 area of ages. I don't know if I have time to go through the whole bunch of them, but I won't try right at this moment.
Actually, an interesting mathematical fact that I think is correct is that you had 6 kids. Those 6 kids had 12 kids, and those 12 kids multiplied to 24 kids.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Is that interesting?
I hadn't thought
I
about
hope that's
that.
correct mathematically, but okay, we are almost out of our time.
Yeah.
And there was one question that I think we need in here because us kids grew up with Winnie's coming and visiting the yard, Winnie's. And I wondered if you could talk about them a little bit of where they
the
come
Winnies.
from. Nobody has Winnie's.
Of course, all the time the children grew up, there were Winnies that occupied at times our backyard. There's a Winnie tree. And I'm not sure where you get a Winnie tree, but if you go to a nursery and ask them for a Winnie tree, I'm sure you can get one and plant it in your yard, and then the Winnies will visit you. But you have to have a Winnie tree. And they're a wonderful tree to have because every now and then there's things just happen on the tree, and little packages of candy or little toys or something would show up on the Winnie tree. Nobody would have any idea how they got there and who put them there, but it had to be the Winnies that did it, and then it showed up on the Winnie tree. And so when the youngsters come home from school, they'd run to see if anything was on the Winnie tree, and if there was great excitement and disappointment if not. But the Winnie tree was a big thing in our family growing up. And I hear some people talk about having a Winnie tree, but not very many. And I think more of them should be. So all of you children should plant a Winnie tree. Have it in your yard for your young people as they grow up so that they can appreciate how much happiness you get from having a Winnie tree.
Okay.
Thank you, Mom. That's all the questions we have at this time, but I'm wondering, is there anything more you would like to add to just finish us out?
Well, it's been a wonderful life for me, having all this family around me at all times. And many, many times this family has given a lot for me, like Dwight and Carrie, for instance, took me on 2 trips that were month-long trips up into Alaska and Canada. And they're wonderful places to visit. If you ever get to go that way by car, so your train or by bus type training or traveling, so that you can get around and see these places and visit different things in them. It's well worthwhile. But just having a family that's always there, willing to help you and do things for you, and all of them have been great, great children. I know families that have very sad problems with children, but not this one. They've always been happy, good kids. And it's what makes a good family.
And the very last question we have is Jim wants to know if you can remember any of your childhood songs that you used to sing and little ditties that you loved.
I'll tell you something, children, all of you. You don't want to hear me sing. That's the last thing you want is to hear me sing. Believe me.
That's a good spot.
Thank you. The end.
Sit on.
Go.
Okay, Mom, the next question we're going to deal with is about one that Janet Reasons, one of the twins, submitted. And she wanted to know what would be probably one of the funniest or funnest stories that came out of your years of sales work. So does one come to your mind?
Oh, why? There were probably a whole lot of funny ones, but this is post my big birthday party too. Janet didn't get her question in there to get in with the others, and so we're finalizing it with Janet's question. And for Janet's information, I think maybe the funniest thing that happened to me was I was working for Encyclopedia Britannica, and I had appointments set for me by the company, and they set one for me out at Nia Bay. Anyway, the farthest point you can go and get up on the ocean there. It's an amazing place, but the Indian reservation is up there. And I went up there on an appointment one day. I started out fairly early because it's a long drive. It's way up to Heckengonaghan to get there. And these people welcomed me. They had asked to have an appointment to see it, so I was very happy to walk in and spend about 2 hours going over all the different features of Encyclopedia Britannica. And they were very thrilled with it. Oh, they liked it. They thought it was wonderful. And they ordered it. They paid me the money, and I had one of my Encyclopedia Britannica orders from them. But it was a long drive, and then I had to do that long drive home. And I didn't get home until somewhere around 11 o'clock that night. Just took forever for me to go do that appointment. So I had a good night's sleep, and in the morning I wake up to the phone ringing, and here it's these people, and they're canceling their order in the morning after I went through all that to show it to them, and they wanted it so bad, and it was really pretty. I guess it was funny that it's funny in a funny way. But anyway, that's what happened. That was one of my really odd stories.
Do you remember how much the Britannica cost back in those days when you were selling it?
the
What the whole
deposit.
set was?
As I remembered, it was only $130, but I may not be remembering it correctly.
Well, what had the people had to pay you as
Oh, they only had to pay me.
Ten.
They just had to pay me $10
Yeah.
to order the book, and that $10 was mine to keep. That was what I got. So I turned in the order. On my way home, I stopped and mailed in their order. So it had to go through channels to get canceled too.
Okay.
But anyway, it was kind of an odd episode. I didn't usually have orders cancel.
Okay.
So I guess the kids that think Starbucks is maybe not fair, paying them a minimum wage of $10 an hour, should rethink what you got that day for all your hours
My
of
hard
work.
work.
That was
The
a
hours I
long
put in.
day.
Right on. Well, you certainly didn't get paid as much in the many days that I was selling things. I sold a lot of different things. I was in sales work all my life. But the last 20 years I was in real estate, and that was by far my favorite sales because I was on my own for time. I could set my own appointments. I could call on the phone, make my own appointments. I had a way of getting an appointment that most people didn't even know about, but it really worked for me. I would dial up a number. I'd dial up this number, and this lady, Mrs. whoever would answer the phone, and I'd say, "Hi there," and Mrs. Baker, or whoever I wanted to say, and well, at that time I'd say her name, and then she'd say hi, and I'd say, "Have you got your property for sale?" Someone told me that you had your house for sale, and a friend of mine, John Lewis, told me that your house was for sale. So I called you to see if maybe you'd talk to me about helping you sell it. And she said, "Oh, I haven't the slightest idea of selling my house. I never even talked about it. In fact, who's John Lewis?" I said, "Oh, wait a minute. I must have... Don't you even know John Lewis?" "Oh, for goodness sake, well then there's some mistake in my calling, because I must have dialed the number wrong, or else I wrote the number wrong when John Lewis gave it to me, because I thought you were the one that was selling your house." "Well, gee, I'm sorry. I really apologize. I'm really sorry I disturbed you when it wasn't you I was trying to get. But while I've got you on the phone, do you happen to know anyone that has got a house for sale? If you have, I'd sure appreciate helping them do it or being in on it, if you didn't mind giving me their name and phone number." And you'd be surprised how often that person would know someone that was talking about selling their house or thinking about it or something. And it gave me an in because I had their phone number. I'd call those people and talk to them. And if it turned into something as different as this one did, why, I'd ask them if they did know anybody that was going to sell their house. If they really weren't that serious about it, then I could ask them, because I had their name from Baker. So anyway, that was my way of getting appointments when I was in sales work and sitting down to do what they call cold calling, which was just dialing a phone number.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
I got a lot of business out of it.
You know, the interesting thing about your real estate time is I think you helped every one of us in one way or another, all your kids, buy a piece of property while you were in sales.
That's probably true. All my family bought property because I was so enthused about buying property. And it was fairly easy to buy back in many of the days that I was selling real estate. Fairly reasonable prices on it. And even now today, some of my kids still own property that they bought back when I was selling. Like Carrie and Roy own this piece up over on the canal there. That's a beautiful piece, 5 acres with a view of the mountains and the water. If anyone's looking for a beautiful piece to buy, why, this would be it.
And didn't you help Judy and Kenny get their
yeah.
land where their
Yeah.
house is now, where they
Yeah.
are now?
Their land, Judy and Kenny, where they live, I took them down to show them this piece of property. I can't remember for sure if it was 30 acres or something like that. And it was really a nice place and a beautiful piece of property. And I took them down to show them this, knowing that another salesman in my office had a slip of paper stuck in his pocket that was a sales agreement for someone else to buy this property. Well, when I got Judy and Kenny saw the property where you had to walk across some broken down logs to get to the back part of it, but it was a beautiful piece of property, and it was a creek that was really remarkably nice, and they really wanted that property. So when I signed the sales agreement to them, instead of going through the office and all that foolishness, I went directly to the seller, which is listed on all our agreements, and asked the seller if he would sell to these people, because this guy that had the sale in his pocket was waiting for the people that were trying to buy it to come up with the money to pay for it, and they hadn't yet. So he was very happy to sell it to someone that had the money, and went ahead and signed it. So that was how they happened to get that property.
All right.
Did you have
think-
Joe and Joe find their place also where their house is?
Yes, I
Were you-
believe I did. It was. Some of these were really back a piece.
Yeah.
And yes, I think I helped most of my children buy property, and I tried to get Joe to get in on Judy and me when we were buying some property and selling it again and just making money on it. And the Joes didn't want to do it, but we went into this. I can't think of the name of the lake. It's over on the
Oh,
road.
Square Lake.
No,
Oh,
it
it
wasn't
wasn't it?
Square Lake. Was it? Or maybe it was. Anyway, there was this lake that was close to this property, and there was 5 acres for sale, 2 5-acre parcels for sale. So I bought one, and Judy bought one, and then we made them into a 10-acre parcel by their corners just not touching. We got away with it legally because you couldn't do that with you couldn't call it 10 acres and get away with the what you could do with it. The laws made it difficult to do that, but we made it into separate 5-acre parcels, presumably, and we're buying them that way. So we broke each 5-acre into 4 pieces, and we did this right away, and that made 8 parcels that were an acre and a quarter, and then we drilled the well. We actually called in the well driller and drilled the well. We dug the ditches for the many feet it took to go to the end of each property, so we had water to all the properties. And it just made it a real easy sale. So we sold these acre and a quarter parcels. Of course, there were 8 of them. And we almost doubled our money on the whole thing. And then we went to Bremerton and bought a 6-plex. And this 6-plex was a little run down, and we worked on it for years, for quite a while. Even the family went at times and helped us on this 6-plex. And we paid $100,000 for it, and we sold it for $300,000 a few years later. And this made a really nice income. In fact, I still get $1,000 a month. So does Judy, off the payments when we sold it for $300,000. And it's just a good way for young people to get ahead, to buy this sort of thing, and maybe work on it a while and sell it and make a little money, get ahead with it.
That was
Very good.
kind of how we started, wasn't it? Everybody buying unimproved land.
Yes,
And
yes.
then going out and we even painted our tools to keep them separate and went out and worked on whoever had a piece of unimproved land that needed to be worked on at that time. We did it all together. It was
That's
fun.
what we did. Everybody helped everybody. And that's the way to get ahead, kids. Be sure you work hard all your life. It doesn't pay to sit back and relax and expect everything to happen good, because you got to be working hard. You got to know where
Julie,
you're
it
going.
just cut off.
Oh.
Have goals.
Mom, the camera
That's
just
all right.
cut off.
She
Are
doesn't-
we out of power or out?